Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore. Hello everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of the World of Eora. This is the first episode releasing after the full release of the game of Avowed. This is awesome. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks so much for joining on today's episode. If you are new to this show, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. This is a good one to start off on. This program, this podcast that we're doing here is all about the lore and the world of Eora as seen in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and the newly released game of Avowed, all developed by Obsidian Entertainment. It's set in the world of Eora. So this show's been going on for a few years. We have 4 years of podcasting looking at the history, lore, and game mechanics as seen in Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. And now that Avowed is out, we're going to be shifting focus to Avowed, but we're always going to be making sure to connect it back to Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, where the foundations for all of this stuff began with in the first place. Since today's episode comes shortly after the game's release, I'm not going to talk about anything spoilery today, and in fact, today's episode is mostly going to be my impressions of the game after playing it in early access, and then for a couple of days before recording here, and we'll touch on some of the topics of lore that are going to be important if you want to understand what's going on in the Living Lands. Now, again, to be clear, you don't need to know anything from Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2 in order to understand Avowed or understand the world that they present it to you. Obsidian does a pretty great job at making a lot of this stuff digestible for you, and the tools tips thing where you can, in your dialogue, you can press a button and you can see what some of these words and terms in the world mean has actually been really helpful and concise. But still, it can be a lot to take in if you haven't already been seeped in the world, and so I'm going to try to help maybe touch on some of those topics here on this episode. But if you are new here and you do feel like you're getting a little bit overwhelmed by all these episodes and all this different lore, by all means, I recommend you go and check out episode 0 because it signposts you to some of the more foundational lore for this world. That is, things that are going to be important for even understanding what the world is, like how magic works, why the soul is important, what the cycle of reincarnation is, who the gods are, what the different fantasy races are. So that's definitely a good place to go if you have a little bit of time to dive into the lore. If you don't have a lot of time, and you didn't already know, Obsidian Entertainment has put out 5 short videos on their YouTube channel, voiced by Matt Mercer, explaining some of the more foundational lore, and I think those are great places to start. As far as news goes, the game is releasing today. At least I'm recording it on the day of release, and it's about an hour before really coming out. So I'm sure we're going to see some pretty unique stuff as it goes out. I have taken 3 days off work to play through the game, so I'm really hoping to get further along and also record a second episode. So these ones are kind of pre-recorded rather than recorded later in the week, but whatever. If there's anything I need to update you on, I'll come back and do my little interjection like I usually do for those who've been listening for a long time. Before we dive into the lore, let's just talk about the game of Avowed itself. That way, if anyone, is interested in hearing about the game, but they don't yet want to hear anything about the story or whatnot, they don't have to. I'm not going to include any spoilers, stuff that you wouldn't learn within the first hours of the game, or that you wouldn't learn from exclusively Pillars of Eternity, but I also respect that there are people out there who maybe they don't want anything talked about at all. So let's just talk about the game first, and then we'll dive into the lore.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
So far, my experience of Avowed has been rather positive. I'm going to try not to put a numerical value to it. I feel like that kind of method is a bit out of date at this point in time. Don't get me wrong, I understand why critics have to use it, especially, aggregate websites like Metacritic and things like that. But I think it's a lot more useful to just put it in terms of like did enjoy, did not enjoy, and here's why kind of a thing. We all know this. A lot of us gamers, we've been following journalists and trying to understand how to know if a game is good before we buy it, or at least good for us because, they're getting more expensive and all that. But I have been enjoying Avowed so far. Now, for context, I'm primarily playing on my Xbox rather than on my PC for just various reasons, but I can do both, and I've kind of bounced between the two. I am only about a dozen hours in, and I am still in the first major region of the game, Dawnshore. I have explored the majority of Dawnshore. I'm sure I have to go through with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's anything I've missed, but I will hopefully be soon ready to go to Emerald Stair, which is what I understand the next biome. And then after that, I think it's Shatterscarp or Gallowayne's Tusks. I'm hoping to get the next 2 biomes done and enter into one of the last 2 biomes by the time I'm done these 3 days of playing the game. But I am going through very slowly. I am going through very methodically. I'm reading absolutely everything. I still find out, though, that I have missed things. There's people on the Avowed subreddit who have posts like interactive maps and things like that, and I've discovered that like there's little pieces of gear or there's little notes here and there that I've missed, so I'm going to have to go back and really make sure I've gotten everything. But yeah, I'm about a dozen hours into the game, and I would say overall I'm really enjoying Avowed. It is not yet my current like 10 out of 10, if I was to put a numerical value on it, but it's definitely in the upper echelons. It's very fun. The combat, which I think is one of the major focuses of Avowed, being an action RPG, that's not a surprise. The combat is very well done. Obsidian has stepped up their game in a number of ways. It's snappy, it's punchy, it's responsive, it has impact. I feel like, for lack of a better word, a player in the battlefield, but I also at the same time feel a tension, because things can get pretty dangerous at multiple points in time. And I've really enjoyed playing around with all the different types of weapons. I have at this point tried every weapon out, and I've slaughtered a bunch of enemies at different points with every weapon and every combination of weapons that I can think of. And it's all been very fun. I think that no matter what kind of combative playstyle you approach as, you can have a lot of fun with it. I have kind of settled on an arquebus, so like a rifle type of weapon, as my one main weapon. I like to kind of snipe things from afar, and there's a really lovely perk where time slows down whenever you charge up a power attack. I don't like the fact that I have to, invest 3 ability points to get the maximum time slowing down, because that's 3 ability points I could spend somewhere else. But thankfully, the respec option for your level ups is pretty accessible, especially at the start. And so I'm going to be using that pretty soon, but I haven't done that yet. But so I've been focusing on the arquebus. I've had that upgraded to the fine quality. And my other weapons that I mainly use is a grimoire that holds 4 spells that are ready and accessible for me to launch at any point in time, paired with a melee weapon. I was planning on doing a grimoire with a pistol to be a gun mage, and I've been talking about that before the game came out. But I found that a lot of the magic I like using in the game is close to medium range, and the slow reload of the pistol is not ideal. And then also trying to navigate where I am in the battlefield and keep an eye on the reticle for where my pistol is aiming. I found that I wasn't paying attention to one or either. And so I ended up switching to a melee weapon, and it was way more fluid for my particular gameplay style. So that's what I've been using. I have a unique weapon called Drawn in Winter, which actually has really interesting lore in it that I've talked about on a previous episode. And so that's been very fun. The wands are also really cool. It's fun to do a dual wielding wands. And weirdly enough, daggers are really fun. Just like stab, 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 stab. And I feel like Roberto from Futurama. And it's very fun. I kind of even miss having a shield, because when I first started playing, I had a little round shield and I was pairing it with a sword, and being able to block and all that was just very rewarding. Like, it felt like I was timing it really well. And so Obsidian have done a great job at making the combat feel great. I'm not necessarily a fan of the upgrading at this point in time. Now, don't get me wrong, the upgrading in Avowed is far more substantial than it was in Pillars of Eternity or in the Outer Worlds even. The upgrading is actually, I would even say, instrumental to the gameplay. I feel like you really do need to engage with the upgrading if you want to kind of keep up with the damage output that enemies have. That, or you're going to have to just really be careful of where you're going and making sure you're only sticking to the regions where your proper level is. Because I found pretty quickly a lot of my weapons becoming quite useless pretty quickly, and that was a little bit frustrating. And it kind of, I'm sure this was part of the design, it made me start realizing, like, oh boy, I think I do want to chase down these chests after all, because there's all these treasure chests lying around, and they kind of just gave you some like upgrade materials and a little bit of gold, and I was like, that's cool. But like honestly, I was more rewarded by just exploring for chests than I was finding them. But now that I have this kind of drive to like, I need to upgrade my weapons, now I'm motivated to go get these chests. The problem is now it feels grindy, right? So now, like, instead of jumping from rooftop to rooftop, which is something I've been doing just for the fun of it, now I'm like looking for chests because I need to be able to upgrade my materials. So, and this is just a me thing, right? Like every player is different. So now I've kind of gone from being motivated to jumping on these rooftops for fun versus now just looking for upgrade material. So that's one thing I haven't necessarily liked. There's some things, obviously, though, I need to figure out. Like, I generally don't engage with upgrading, so I've only really kind of fiddled around with it in the last few hours. So I'll let you guys know if maybe there's more to it than I'm understanding. Currently, though, it just kind of feels like I need to pick up absolutely everything that I possibly can and upgrade as often as I can. And when I go to the party camp and I see that I don't have enough quite yet, that's a little bit frustrating. And then when I go into combat, it's a little harder. So I feel like there's a little bit of like balance there where I don't feel as powerful in the game world, and that kind of takes away from the fun. But at the same time, and this is another concern I have, is that the combat could get samey after a while, but I'll touch on that in a second. Going back to like this thing I was talking about, though, about jumping from rooftop to rooftop, this is something that I think is great in Avowed, and this is one area where Obsidian has really knocked it out of the park. The exploration and the reward for exploring in this game is top notch. There have been very few moments where I feel like if I decide to, walk a little bit further and check out this little alcove or just turn the corner and see if there's something there, very rarely have I run into situations where I'm like, oh, well, that was kind of a waste of gamer time. It doesn't matter. I just turn around and go back, obviously. But like very often, if you can explore in a place, then you're probably going to get rewarded in some way. Like, obviously, if you're exploring in areas where you're constantly falling off invisible walls, maybe you're in a place you're not supposed to be. But, like, I spent a good amount of time literally jumping around on rooftops in the city of Paradise, just seeing wherever I could get. And I was having a great time, and I was getting treasure and loot as a result. It was just pure giddy gamer fun, and I had a great time doing that. And then out on in the land like itself, like outside of the city, you can do the same thing. It's easy to get lost, but it's also easy to find lots of things, and the mini map gives you a lot of little identifiers to be able to go find plants and whatnot. And then when you go to get these plants, you can spot something in the distance. You're like, what's that? And then go and investigate. Exploration is very, very well rewarded in the game of Avowed. And that's something personally I love. So it's like minute to minute, there's always going to be something interesting that you can chase. And you're going to find as you open up the map that you have these like long lines of exploration that you took. And you have to kind of like go back to where you started because you just kept following these rabbit trails. So that's been very fun so far. The story it seems interesting. As someone who has been seeped in the lore for this game for a very long time, I'm definitely bought into a lot of what's already going on. So right at the start of me being a godlike character, that was fascinating, and not knowing what kind of godlike I had was an interesting question. Seeing the lore return of the nation of Adir is something I'm very familiar with, so I'm a little bit like, I'm not over it necessarily, but in the sense of like, I've seen a lot of Adir in Pillars of Eternity 1. I've talked about them to death, right? So to see Adir return again in this game is interesting in one sense, because it's like, okay, well, how can I know them on a deeper level? But at the same time, I'm also like, I kind of want to know a little bit about some of the other empires at this point in time. But I also understand why the Adir Empire would be chosen. Based off of how it seems like they want this narrative to go, I have a couple theories on where it's going. Adir seems like a way better choice than Rauatai, which would be the nearest empire that also would be in the Living Lands. I haven't really seen a lot of Rauatai, which is another empire within this world, but I do know they have a settlement called Thirdborn, or at least people who have left the nation. But we'll get into that a little. I don't want to overload you with too much lore if you are new to today's episode. But the story seems interesting so far. There's I talked to Venus Theory in my last episode, and he referred to it not as the hero's story, but as the hero's mystery. And I really think that that kind of is a resonating idea of what's going on here. You have this character who we don't know a lot about you. The only thing we know is that you were born as a godlike, You don't know what godlike you are. You were an outsider in a deer, but the emperor, basically took you under and you became promoted and you are now his special little important boy, and he sends you off to go to the living lands. But there's still a lot we don't know. The circumstances of our birth, I think, is going to be really important in this case, because it seems like when you come to the living lands, there's this voice that you hear, and it stands out to you. So it stands to reason that you didn't hear this voice prior to coming to the living lands. So if this voice is your god, which it might not be, I'm not saying it is, but if it is your god, which a lot of us are surmising it is, then why haven't we heard them anywhere else outside of the living lands? It makes me wonder, were you born in the living lands, originally speaking? Did I miss that part of the cutscene, perhaps? That's very possible. I've been taking notes like a madman, and occasionally I realize, oh shoot, I haven't been paying attention as much. So it's very possible. But yeah, so a lot of this, I'm going to try to not dwell too much on all the little lore bits. We'll talk about them in a deeper length later in this episode and in future episodes. But yeah, the hero's mystery is one that I'm really intrigued by. And then, discovering what the Dream Scourge is and all that. I haven't been hooked by that yet because I'm still pretty early on. I've fought the big Dream Scourge bear, so it's like, oh cool, there's zombie mushroom people and animals and things. That's cool. I need a carrot to chase, obviously. But me, I'm way more motivated by who the hell am I? I don't even know if I'm the good guy, honestly. My character could be the bad guy in this game, and I don't even know it. At the end, it reveals I'm the bad guy in some way, shape, or form. I have a lot of theories because, again, I'm pretty steeped in the lore over the last few years playing these games and reading up on it, but that's been very good so far. I've also spent a lot of time just reading books and reading plaques and reading notes and documents, and this game kind of rewards that. And so we have these three things here. We have this great combat, we have rewarding exploration, and then there's also this time where you can just sit back and read in-game books, and you're and for me personally anyways, I feel like I am getting what I want out of that time. I don't feel like I invested that time in a negative way. And for a game to be able to balance those three things in a way that it's still fun and you can just lose track of time in, I think that's a really impressive feat that Obsidian has nailed. So now, again, I haven't gone very far into the game, so I have a lot to learn still, but I do have a couple of concerns moving forward. One of which is I am concerned about the combat getting a little samey. And the reason I say that is because so far I've kind of settled into my play style, and I've noticed that every time I go into combat, I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over again. It's still exciting, and I'm still enjoying it, but I'm only 12 hours in, and I'm sure I have at least a couple or maybe even a few dozen more to go through at the rate I'm going. And so unless things change up, maybe it'll start to feel samey after a while. But that also kind of carries a little bit of an issue with it. If I'm forced to redo all of my combat, oh, okay, turns out the way I do things doesn't work, then I'm going to feel like I have to start from scratch, and that's going to make me feel like I invested all this time into my one playstyle and I don't get to do it anymore. But if I only have this one playstyle and there's no variety, then it's going to feel samey for a while. So I know a really common solution to that in gaming is to make combat more complex or to add different enemy types, and that can certainly do for a little while. But I think a lot of us, veteran gamers, recognize that also comes with issues as well, right? For example, one thing that a lot of games will do is all right, well, you've gotten really good at killing these enemies, so now we're going to have these other elites that come out and they have armor. You have to get rid of their armor, then you can get rid of their HP. And so now you have to kind of really, focus a little bit more on the battlefield of okay, well, who am I going to take out first and how am I going to tackle this guy? And it does add a little bit of complexity. But in the long run, a lot of us gamers know this, it basically just adds time to the battles at this point in time. I'm still doing the same things. It's just now taking a little longer, and maybe I have to think a little bit ahead of time of who am I going to take out first. So I think that'll help a little bit, but at the end of the day, it is still samey. But I have been encouraged because I have been watching YouTube shorts and some clips of other people playing, and I've seen a lot more mid to late game battles that people have been taking, and they look really flashy. I've seen people dive out of the sky, land on the ground, knock people back, and they summon up some magic to freeze people. They turn around and they use this special ability from one particular weapon they have to blow someone to smithereens. They turn around, they switch to their other loadout, and they just start hacking and it was crazy. And so I think that there's probably a lot of variety. I just haven't hit that yet. And also, admittedly, I'm not very good at that kind of a thing. I am very much not good at balancing a gajillion abilities that I have to think of on the fly. I am very much the kind of combat gamer where I run in and I use the very few tools that I have and I try to master them really well, which works well in some games, but doesn't work well in a game where you have a lot of abilities. And often I choose passive abilities for my upgrades, and so maybe I'm cutting myself short in that regard. Other than that, that's my really only that concern, considering it's a major part of the gameplay. I have been really rewarded by exploration and diving into the story. Obviously, we'll see how the story goes as it continues, but I'm pretty hooked in. But I have heard others on the internet are a little concerned because they say the story hasn't really kind of engaged them as much as, Obsidian's reputation precedes for themselves. And I wonder if that does come from perhaps not being steeped in the world prior to playing Avowed, which, Obsidian can't help that, obviously, right? And that's a really fine line for them to have to walk, to be like, we have to make this a living, breathing world that people returning to will feel isn't, Eora 101, because they're second or third year students at this point. But at the same time, you do want it to be accessible. People have never been here before. And so it's a really hard line to walk. And me personally, I'm really feeling rewarded for it. Like, I think they did a good job. But I know some people are, especially newer ones, some are saying that the story hasn't quite gripped them yet. And I think it's because they don't necessarily feel the gravity of what's going on, right? Like if you're a Pillars of Eternity veteran, you come to this game, you discover you're a godlike, but you don't know what kind. That's like what's going on there, right? Like that matters to you. But if you're brand new, the game tells you it matters, but you don't have that personal investment ahead of time, right? So yeah, it's a difficult line to walk. I think Obsidian has done a great job, and obviously not everybody is always going to be fully fulfilled. So overall, I'm really enjoying the game. I'm really excited to finish up Dawn Shore, read a lot more books. There's a lot of really interesting lore that I don't know a lot about yet because I haven't finished the game. So fortunately, I don't have a lot to report. But yeah, hopefully over the next few days, I can get really far and have something more meaty to give you guys. But for now, let's touch on some of the stuff that we see that is important for the lore in Avowed.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So there is a whole bunch of stuff that I have personally seen just from playing the dozen hours that I've played. Right from the beginning in character creation, we learn about the nation of Adir, we learn about godlikes existing, and we see the variety of backgrounds that can exist for someone who works in the upper courts or administration of the Adiran government. We go to the living lands, we learn a little bit about what it's like, how things there are more potent than anywhere else in the world, which makes me ask, why is that? We get a little bit of a vision of the gods in the opening cinematic. We learn that the godlike races that exist in the world are vanishing. We get dates and days and times, right? Like spring of 2831, which, by the way, as a lore nerd, did kind of like chuff me a little because it shouldn't be spring. It should be, I say that and now it's like leaving my brain. It's like Magi Verno or something. No, I think that's winter. Anyways, there's fantasy names for the seasons in this game, and they didn't use it. They said spring of 2831. Now, to be fair, the seasonal names in this world do originate from a Valian culture, right? So perhaps spring is the Adiran term, if we're getting technical, I guess. But still, anyways. So we learned that, and the date was 2831, which is actually only, I want to say, 3 years after Deadfire's beginning. I think Deadfire, which is the second Pillars game, happens in 2828, does it not? And so it's only a few years after the events of Deadfire, so it's very short after that. We learn about this voice that's existing in your head, and I want to talk about that, but I don't want to do too much spoiling. We hear this voice at some point in time, and it's really important. There's this really fun moment where we learn of a person who died whose name is Brit. They were a servant of Nemnoch, and that is a harkening back to the second Pillars of Eternity game. There are a lot of people there who love the character of Nemnoch, and I don't want to spoil him for you, but he's a great character. You got to check him out. And speaking of other characters, we have found some returning characters. I myself have ran into Sansa, who is a cartographer from the second Pillars game, and Marina, who is a merchant from the White March DLC of the first Pillars game. There are going to be more, but I just haven't collected them all into a list. We learn about the Dream Scourge, which is the soul plague that we are here to deal with. We learn about Dawnshore and the city of Paradis, which is actually like an old Pargrunan dwarf city that people are now living in now, and it has an entire government structure to it, sort of. Pretty early on in the game, get to even have a glimpse of the Beyond, which is where basically souls go after you die. It's a big metaphysical cosmic space. You'll see it fairly early in the game, so it's not a big spoiler. You'll get a little glimpse of it anyways. That's called the Beyond. Honestly, it's fascinating and cool, and just in the background alone, I was wondering a lot about where are we and what is this implying, but I'm not going to talk about that yet. We also found cows. I don't know if you've noticed this. There are fantasy cows in this game. I don't recall seeing fantasy cows in Pillars of Eternity 1 or 2. If anyone can correct me on that, that'd be great. We see a lot of flags and banners of other nations, including Aedir, Rauatai, Glonfoth, Valian Republics. And this is, again, if you're new, this is all kind of going over your head, but these are just nations and cultures that exist within the world. And there's a few as well that a lot of Pillars of Eternity veterans might not have recognized. There was one for a country called Ebet. There was one for Ishadimil, and one for Granvalia. And those names are familiar, but I don't recall seeing the banners for them very much. We learned of some factions called the Cartographers Guild and the Expedition Corps. There's an Archmage walking around potentially in the game called Tane, which is also, again, a reference to the second Pillars of Eternity game, but I haven't run into him in person, so I'm hoping to run into him. Star Metal gets referenced often in this game. If you read unique item descriptions, or if you eventually kind of find some, Star Metal, which is literally a resource, it's a type of ore that fell out of the sky, that exists within this world. There's a volcano called Mount Forja. There's a reference to a person named Cryptic Nil. If you take the scholar background and you're talking with Tej at the Aediran Embassy in the city of Paradis, and they talk about how you were at the Broggenhill Academy, which is a place where you learn to become an arcane knight. And I guess there's a death guard there, which is basically a person who refused to die and turned into a skeleton. There's way more to it than that, but I'll just leave it at that for now. A person named Cryptic Nil, I guess. So that was interesting. We learn of some of the fantasy languages. In particular, we get a companion named Marius, and he occasionally speaks in the Lember language, which is often used in the Pargrunan dwarf societies. There's a little bit of history involving an Archmage Consulhot that we get to read in Sansa's Emporium that talks about why he was kind of outcasted from the circle of the Archmagi in the first place, which is a whole other topic on its own. We learn about dank spores and sporelings, which are a type of creature that we'll see in Emerald Stair. And apparently, in Paradis, there was a dank spore outbreak in 2748 AI, and so that was important. There's a chunk of the moon that apparently might be somewhere in the Living Lands, or at least it did at one point fall on the Living Lands, and that's really cool that there's a chunk of the moon just laying around. There are unique weapons everywhere, and just as a heads up, if you are new to all this stuff, read the item descriptions for the unique items. Because often it tells a story. It often tells you the story of how that unique item came to be, or it will tell you a story of a unique figure within the history of the world. And I get a lot of my lore from that. I have noticed the lore on the unique items in this game is a little different than how they are from Pillars of Eternity. I haven't been able to know as much about the world at large, but I know more about that item in particular, which is still pretty interesting. You learn pretty early on as well that you can access these things called ancient memories. There are these spots within the map where you can go learn about some memory of ancient past. And, we learned a couple cool things from that, but I'm not going to talk about them here right now. And at one point in the game, I even got to watch a theatrical performance of a dwarf doing their best to make animal noises in the town square. And that was super fun. Right, so there's all of these different things that could be talked about at different points in time. And I want to touch on all of them, but a lot of them are really microcosmic at this point, right? They're small, and so I can't do a whole episode on them, but also I have a lot more about the world at large to look at. I want to learn more about the Dream Scourge. I want to know what this voice is. I want to know what's happening with the godlikes. What's happened in the 3 years between the Deadfire game and now. Expanding on some of the lore for the Aediran Empire. Maybe finding some more returning characters and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff to be talked about. And I'm hoping to talk about all of these and more in future episodes. But for now, that's kind of the place where I'm at.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
If any of these things sound interesting to you, I have done episodes on many of these topics. And I already signposted new listeners to go to episode 0. But new or longtime listeners, if you kind of need a refresher on any of these things, here are some really, I would say, pivotal episodes for you to maybe check out. The Pergrunan dwarves are an ancient, well, not ancient, I guess, but they're probably near ancient in this world. They are a society of dwarves that are kind of motivated by wanderlust. They are constantly exploring the world. They kind of originated out of another nation called the Grand Valia, or the Old Valia. I'm putting the. I don't think there is a the in front of it. I don't know why I did that. But anyways, Grand Valia / Old Valia, that was a civilization that has since then collapsed. And these Pergrunan dwarves originated from that society. And they are now, like I said, marked by wanderlust. They go out into the world. They settle in all these different places. And you can see Pergrunan dwarven ruins everywhere within the world because they go to these places, they settle down, they get tired of it, they move on. But there are a few places within this world where they have settled down and relatively stayed. And supposedly, there is one of those such settlements in the Living Lands at Solace Keep, which we won't get to until you get to a location called Galawain's Tusks. But I've done an episode on the Pergrunan dwarves if you're interested in learning more about their culture and their history and what they're like, and the language they speak called Lember, which I'm hoping to learn more of in Avowed. That is episode 78 on the Pergrunan dwarves. Now, obviously, there's also some overarching themes as well, things that I'll mention in episode 0, but if you're wanting to check it out, you can go listen to episode 7 on the gods. Careful for spoiler warnings. I do put them up just so you'll hear them. You can learn about what kind of character you are, which is called a godlike character. That's why you have mushrooms growing off of you, because you're god-touched in some way, shape, or form. Episode 21 is about the godlike and what it means to be a godlike and why it matters that when you were in your mother's womb that a god touched you, and now you have this weird physiological form, but you'll also have powers that come with that as a result. Unfortunately, you can't breed, so you can't have a family as a godlike unless you adopt. And your existence can be viewed as a gift or a curse depending on the society that you're in. As you'll tell within a lot of the opening hours of Avowed, your character is kind of considered an outcast, even for a godlike, because godlike always know who they hail from, like which god touched them when they were in the womb, but you don't. You have no idea. The godlike are really interesting. There's a really interesting piece of lore involved with having a chime in your soul that I want to talk about, but I've kind of learned some stuff later in the game that happens that was a little bit spoiled for me that I don't want to spoil for you, so I'm not going to mention anything there. Episode 10 is The Wheel, and that's the name given to the cycle of reincarnation that exists within this world. And the short version of that is basically you die, your soul leaves your body, it goes to the beyond, which is like a metaphysical plane where souls go, I guess, and then the soul will leave the beyond and enter into a new body, and thus the cycle of reincarnation, called The Wheel. And there's a lot of interesting things that happen as a result of that, because there is a science of the soul called animancy, which hasn't really been explored in the Dawnshar region that much, but it's been kind of mentioned. But there is a science of the soul called animancy, or more specifically, the science of the stuff souls are made of, which is called essence. And so that's why you have essence potions, by the way. It's potions imbued with essence, which is the stuff souls are made of. It's very interesting because in the science of animancy, or if there's a person who has some particular powers akin to that, they can actually read souls and possibly even read past lives of souls. And some people use that in a form of like purity to say, like, if you have a pure, uncheckered past of your soul or something like that, maybe you won't be allowed into certain factions or groups. If you're interested in learning about the nation of Adir, which is the place where your character comes from, I have an episode number 103 where I kind of did a summary episode of a lot of things about Adir. But if you're willing to go and dive into, I think, a deeper dive of them, I think episodes like 4 through 7 are all Adir related. Is very early on in this podcast's life. A couple other interesting episodes to listen to just off of some of the things I've seen in Dawnshore. If you're interested in the Circle of the Archmagi, which are these higher echelon super mages, basically, who know a lot of secret stuff about the world, and they're very powerful. They've created a lot of the magic spells that you'll use in the game and within the world itself. Now, that's episode number 35, and I'm hopeful that we'll run into 1 or 2 of the Archmagi members in the Living Lands, but we'll see. If you want to hear an episode about the cute little dragon lizard people running around called the Zorops that you often will attack and, kill in their tribes and in their homes, those little creatures, those are called Zorops. That's episode number 32. And lastly, the one I think I'll mention here is unique items. That's episode 112. And I think that unique items are interesting in the world of Eora because it's not just, oh, an item is unique and it has a fun little item description. Yippee games. It's like there is actually a lore reason why unique items might be able to have a story in them that your character could read, theoretically speaking. I think it's just an interesting kind of topic to talk about. Actually, and now that I think about it, there is one other episode that you should check out, and that is episode 34, and that's called Watchers. And those are about a unique type of person that can exist in this world who can read souls, essentially, without having to have all the scientific equipment attached. They basically have a sixth sense for being able to peer into a person's soul and interact with them in some way. And it's mysterious on how it works, but they're able to do it. And their Watchers will play a part within this game. At least in one instance for sure. I don't know a lot of details, and I'm not going to give away a lot of details, even if I did. But that's another one you could possibly listen to if you're open to learning about this stuff ahead of time. If you are the kind of player, though, you're like, I just want to play Avowed, learn this stuff as I go, by all means, that's awesome. Do it that way. If you find yourself not necessarily being hooked by a lot of the story, though, and you're like, why is it so important that, I don't know what my God is, consider going and checking out the episode on Godlike, episode number 21, and maybe that'll help you a little bit more. If you're wanting to understand why the Living Lands is so iconic the way it is and being this wild, untamable, verdant landscape, then check out any of the episodes I've done on the Living Lands, which I think the most recent one I've done on the Living Lands was episode 82, although I did technically talk about it in episode 1 or 2. But episode 82 is a little more of a focused episode on the Living Lands specifically. Now, before I close out today's episode, there is one last thing that I'd like to do, and I'm hoping to make this a regular occurrence within each episode, but it'll depend on the length of the recording each time, is I'm going to either take a book that's in the game or a unique item that's in the game, in any of the games actually, not just Avowed, and I'm just going to read the item description, whether or not it has anything to do necessarily with the topic that we're talking about, although obviously if I can, that would be best way to do it. But just to read something. There's a lot of lore, there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of item descriptions and books in the games that don't necessarily link to an overarching topic, but it's still fun to talk about, but I can't do a whole episode about. So that's kind of what I'm going to do here. So for today's episode, there is a unique bow that you can get in Avowed, and I just want to use this as a way to exemplify unique items in the game and just give you an example of that. I was debating on this and the little plaque that you can read about Console Hot's Touch or whatever I think this is a weapon that you can get fairly early in the game, so it's not a spoiler that you're going to get it and all that. So I think this is a safe one to do for the first episode. So this is a unique bow called the Long Touch. So in the game of Avowed, you get unique items. They have extra special powers, and they also have unique item descriptions, giving a little bit of a story of either a person, the weapon itself, or the world at large within the item description. And this one's called the Long Touch. And this is what we read in the item description for that. An old hunter from Glonfoth crafted this bow as a coming-of-age present for his granddaughter, using wood freely given from a Delumgun's tree and horn from an elder stag. It was meant to keep the young elves safe on their hunts, and for a time it did. When her grandfather passed, however, something in the woman broke. She began to set her sights on more and more dangerous prey, becoming addicted to the thrill of the hunt. Eventually, the creatures of the forest no longer provided the challenge she sought, and she began to hunt wilder, and even sometimes her fellow kith. Over time, her malice and cruel intent seeped into the bow, imbuing it with a vicious lethality. Those that have wielded the Long Touch have claimed that when scoring particularly brutal kills, they can sometimes hear faint whispers of triumph in their head. So that's a pretty good item description, especially if you're new to this show, because it introduces us to a lot of interesting topics, things that I've talked about on previous episodes that you can also go and check out. So kind of breaking down a little bit about what we're reading here. We start off with an old hunter from Glonfoth crafted this bow as a coming-of-age present for his granddaughter. Glonfoth is one of the nations and factions that we see in the World of Eora. We meet them in the first Pillars of Eternity game. They're one of the major players in the narrative that's going on in that game. They're essentially groups of tribes that form under one identity of the Glonfothan tribes. They lived in the area natively that you play the first Pillars of Eternity game in, which is often referred to as the Deerwood by people that have colonized there. But the people who didn't colonize there, that were already living there, the native tribes, they were the Glonfathan tribes, the nation of Glonfath. Largely comprised of elves and Orlins, which you can learn about in other episodes or from a very short video on the Obsidian YouTube channel on different races in this world. It seems that this grandfather is an elf because it mentions his granddaughter also being a young elf. And in this world, there's no interbreeding. There's no half elf, half human, no half Orlin, half Amaoan, although I'm sure you can picture it if you really, really want to. There is no interbreeding. So this is an elven family unless there's some level of adoption. So he creates this unique bow that he gets a couple of special ingredients for. Wood freely given from a Delimgon's tree. A Delimgon is a kind of creature that we see in this game, and you're going to see it in Avowed as well, but they're very prevalent in Pillars of Eternity 1. We do for sure see Delimgon later in the game of Avowed. I might even be coming up on seeing them myself pretty soon. The closest analog I can give to you if you're very new to this world is that they're kind of like a forest nymph. I'm not really sure how to describe it, actually, now that I think about it. The Delimgon, I always think of it as the forest become incarnate. It's almost like a living representation of the forest in an environment that you're currently in. But it is also a creature that has its own thoughts and individuality, but it definitely comes out of the forest itself. If the forest is rotten, for example, then the Delimgon will kind of be rotten and a little bit insane. So there is an innate connection that a Delimgon, which is kind of like, a forest nymph, I don't know, that doesn't feel like the right thing to say, but it's a close analog, I guess. That's what a Delimgon is. And so for a Delimgon to freely give wood from the tree that they come from or the tree that they are is really important. Like, that's a very big sign of trust and relationship. And it would obviously be imbued with a lot of magical power because a Delimgon is not just a tree, it's like a living tree in a sort of a way. And so it's imbued with a special amount of essence. And then the horn from an elder stag being kind of like a deer moose thing. And, it's a stag. It's like a real world stag. I don't know why I'm trying to explain it to you. But anyways, a horn from the elder stag, obviously just like coming off of the antler. It being an elder stag means it's probably revered a lot by the Glonfathan peoples. And so this is a pretty well-crafted and very unique bow meant to keep this young elf safe when they're out hunting. Now, at some point, this grandfather passes away, and this girl, now young woman, she just kind of broke mentally, and she just starts taking it out on the things that she goes out hunting, I guess. It seems like this is a thing that kind of helps her cope with her grandfather's death. But she gets on bigger and harder and more dangerous hunts, and she eventually actually starts hunting other people. It says here that she became addicted to the thrill of the hunt, which is interesting. I'm willing to bet that this young girl, if she wasn't already a Gallowanian, she probably would be at this point. Galawain is one of the deities that exists within this world. There's 11 gods in this world. Galawain is one of them, and I often call him Lord of the Hunt in all of its forms, because that's kind of what he's called. So she probably would have become a very devout Galawain worshiper at some point in this transition in her life. She eventually was no longer interested in the forest creatures. They didn't provide enough challenge, so she began to hunt wilder. Wilder are the creatures that exist in the world. Zorops are an example of a wilder. If you're playing Avowed, those little lizard-like creatures, they're wilder. They have a level of sentience. They have a level of cognition. They're able to form tribes and societies. You can even see that with Zorops, that they actually have these little huts. They have little tools. They have a shaman, so they have some level of a religion. They have stratas and hierarchies within their societies. So there's actually a decent amount of, like I said, sentience and cognition to these creatures. Ogres are another kind of wilder. So these are creatures that are not fully civilized. They're not engaging with what the other civilized, I use that word carefully with air quotes, civilized. They're not exploring the world. They're not developing new technologies. They're not creating philosophy or working on dramatic works of art, necessarily speaking, right? But mostly they're not exploring the world. They're not engaging with the regular kith cultures and societies. Some of these wilders do have their own form of art and religion and all that, but there is definitely a difference between what is referred to as the civilized kith races and the wilder races. And so this young girl, she starts hunting these wilder creatures who would provide a higher challenge because they can actually strategize. And it even sounds like she starts to hunt kith. And I've mentioned that word a couple times if you're not familiar with it. Kith is just the word used for Orlins, Amauans, Elves, Dwarves, Humans, and Godlikes, the civilized races of the world that you see within the main societies. Those are the Kith races. And the last thing to mention from this piece of lore is over time, her malice and cruel intent seeped into the bow, imbuing it with a vicious lethality. This is a thing that can happen within this world because of essence, which you might remember I've already mentioned, is the stuff that souls are made of. But it's not just your soul and my soul that has essence. Rocks and trees and grass and the ambient empty air around you has essence in it, or is parallel to the in-between, which is between life and death, where essence also is. So there's literally essence everywhere. And so it is very possible for this young woman who is kind of like, her soul is connected to her consciousness and her emotional states and her memory. And as she's becoming more cruel and more malicious, some of that like emotional energy, if you will, is like seeping from her soul into the things around her, right? It would radiate out like heat in a cold day or vice versa. This bow, in a sense, it already has essence. It already has capacity to also have essence in it. It's almost like that malice and that cruelty is seeping into the essence that's in the bow, giving it the same flavor that her essence and her soul kind of has. So like there's a way that magic-y stuff can definitely work. And it says here that people who wield the long touch and actually fire off and they make a brutal kill, they can sometimes hear faint whispers of triumph in their head. And this is something that this young woman probably did. They would score a kill and she would have a particular triumphant thing she did. And essence, or a person's soul, is the housing of memory and consciousness and personality. So if there is like a very strong regular memory of her having this unique triumphant thing, as her essence is soaking into the bow, it might also take faint vagaries of her memory doing that. And so it almost like that memory might replay in the new wielder's head. It's all very interesting. I've done an episode on magic. I think it's episode number 17. If you're interested, go ahead and check that out. But yeah, so that's the item, the long touch. There's a lot more lore in there than I realized based on first glance, because, I'm very familiar with a lot of stuff. But that's kind of the thing that I'm hoping to talk about. That's just kind of a taste of what kind of things we can kind of talk about on this podcast. So hopefully that whets your appetite a little bit, and we can get into more stuff on future episodes. If you ever at any point have questions like those, you can go check out those episodes. I do think episode 78 about the Pergrinan dwarves is especially interesting, considering how important and impactful their culture is on the Living Lands area. But you do as you want to do. If you do have any questions, if you're new, email me, worldofeora@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @worldofeora there. And I guess now is as good a time as any to kind of end this episode here. I know I didn't do a deep dive on the lore itself, but again, I'm still pretty early into the game, and a lot of listeners here, you're familiar with a lot of the Pillars of Eternity lore as it is, so I would just be repeating a lot of stuff. And new players, I don't want to spoil anything. So it's kind of very much like a first impressions kind of a thing, and touching on the topics that I'm seeing at the beginning. There'll obviously be other topics later on, like when I get to Emerald Stair, animancy is going to become a very important part. When I meet the character of Yahtzee, learning about the godless people, who are an ancient society of people that were living here in the Living Lands and then disappeared. As well as we learn about this voice in your head, what it means and what it is, and what the Dream Scourge is. There's a lot that we're going to touch on as the next episodes and come out. But for now, that's what we have going on. I am interested to hear from you guys, though, especially if you've been a long-time listener. What are some of the topics that you would like to have a focus on, even if it's from Pillars of Eternity, but especially if it's from Avowed as well, since it's been related, more especially if it's related to all of the games. But I am interested in hearing what kind of things are you wanting to know first? What questions are you wanting to know answered first? And then even if I can't get the answer, there's other gamers out there who are playing this game at mock speeds, and we can kind of get that done. So the worldofeora@gmail.com, @worldofeora is how you can follow me. And if you want to support this show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. I don't expect anyone to do so. It's just there for those who find value in supporting the shows that they enjoy. Now, lastly, and this isn't something I do very often, but if you didn't already know, I've done an interview with the composer for the soundtrack of Avowed, Venus Theory, aka Cameron. That's the episode prior to this one, episode 126. It was a really fun conversation, and I highly recommend you check it out. And also check out Venus Theory stuff on his YouTube and on streaming if you're going to just listen to his music. But he's got a lot of great stuff out there. That's all I'm going to talk about today. Again, for those who've been listening for a long time, I know it wasn't like a deep dive, but I'm not even that deep yet. I'm not even knee deep into what Avowed has yet to offer. So I'm going to have to get a little bit more into it before I can really dive in. But it was really interesting just talking about like what the game is like and some of the touchstones of things that we're seeing. I can already see some of my theories that I had about this game changing with just as a little bit of playthrough. So any theories you guys have, send them my way. Try to keep spoilers away from me. But that at the same time, I'm doing a podcast for this. I've pretty much accepted I might have the game spoiled for me. I actually kind of already did. I know one thing that happens at the end of the game. Shame on the person who said it to me, but it was an accident. I forgive them. Anyways, so don't worry too much about spoiling it for me, I guess, is what I'm saying. I've already accepted that risk by making this podcast, and I'm happy to do so. It might even help me, right? It might even help me if I know what's going to happen, then I can make better content for the future. I don't know. But anyways, I'm going to go turn this off, and I'm going to go back to playing Avowed for 2.5 days, and then I'll make another episode based off what I've learned. And who knows what I'll sound like. I might be haggard and like, oh my God, guys, I was so wrong. I was so wrong about everything. I don't know. Anyways, that's all I've been playing, so I have nothing else to report in that regard. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. I've been your host, Eric, a.k.a. Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.